Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you here for the 2024 My Dog is My Home conference. My name is Dr. John Geller. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm the founder of the Street Dog Coalition, whose mission is to provide free medical care to pets of those experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. I'm going to share some information about what life is like on the street and what some of the barriers are for people that do have pets that are experiencing homelessness. Take a look at this fellow on this first slide. You can see that he's got his hands full for sure. A couple of things I wanted you to notice. Number one, he's probably not going to go through those doors behind him, and he's probably not going to be able to go through any doors because of all the stuff he has and because of the two dogs that he has with him. So that would include places like doctor's office, grocery store, a job interview, even a 7-Eleven to get a cup of coffee. He's just not going to be able to go there. And probably most importantly, a homeless shelter. And as I'll show you later on in this talk, very few homeless shelters allow dogs, except those that are true service dogs. And those are few and far between. Well, call this talk Three Dog Night. And what is Three Dog Night? Just to take a little sidetrack here, it's a band way back from the 60s and 70s. Some of you may remember because they're actually still playing. Joy to the World is one of their better known songs, and they do have in the past provided us some tickets to their concerts. And here's a more modern version of what Dog Night might mean, but I think it's intuitive that it's a really cold night where you may need three dogs to stay warm if you're sleeping out on a sidewalk. From a veterinary point of view, I don't think there's any question that providing veterinary care to a group of pet owners that really has no money at all to pay for even discounted cares is probably one of the biggest challenges in veterinary medicine. Just taking a look at some numbers, the price of veterinary care is rising rapidly as becomes, especially as technology infiltrates into things like imaging and lab work and specialty care. Yet U.S. median household income has been on a pretty steady but relatively slower climb than the cost of services. And so as this gap increases, which we're calling the affordability gap, fewer and fewer people are going to be able to afford veterinary care. It really doesn't just apply to the homeless community. It's working families and households in need that aren't going to be able to afford care. Minority populations are definitely represented in this poverty group, as you can see from this chart, where uh, Black people and Hispanics are overrepresented in poverty. And pardon my cat, you might hear howling a little bit in the background. He seems to howl for no particular reason, even if he's well fed.
Much well fed.
There's some other background information. You see a lady here at our first Minnesota street clinic, July 2020, just after the George Floyd killing occurred. But not surprisingly, white households have the highest percentage of pet ownership, and that's now pushing 70%. This was actually almost 10 years ago, and Latino Hispanic households next. But Black and African American households have a much smaller percentage of pet ownership, probably because of many of the financial challenges associated with it, and because they are the predominant minority among those living in poverty. They're at 37%. This is an updated number, and it's a significant undercount. 630,000 people experiencing homelessness in the United States in 2022. Two-thirds of them are sheltered. One third of that group is unsheltered. and also two-thirds are male, one-third is male. Those are major approximations. Estimates are that the real number is probably twice that. So we could estimate between 1 and 1.2 million people are experiencing homelessness or have been uh, or are currently. Many of those that are uncounted and unsheltered are doubled up couch surfers, live in their cars and vans, motel rooms, campers, travelers, living in abandoned buildings, shacks, etc. So many of them aren't going to be counted because they're just not found during this one-day homeless count that occurs every January. Current estimates vary from 10 to 15% of homeless individuals have pets in the US. It's a higher number, more than 15% in warm states like California, Texas, and Florida, but it's probably down closer to 10% in cold states uh, such as Minnesota, upstate New York, for example. Based on those numbers and the previous number where we're estimating, if we do estimate there's a million homeless in the United States and 15% have pets, that's 150,000 pets, but it could possibly go up to 200,000. And the good thing about that number is it's a doable number, meaning we probably can provide basic veterinary care to all those pets over a period of time if we're able to do it on at least once or twice a year basis. No surprise, but stigmatization of the homeless continues to be at a high level, regardless of a lot of the conversations that are going on. You can see it if you just watch someone walk down the street where there might be a homeless encampment set up on a sidewalk. The aversion, uh, ignoring or moving to the other side of the street would be strategies, and I'm probably just as guilty of that as anyone else. I'm not sure guilty is the right word, but this, knowing that there's potentially some danger and some possibility of getting drawn into an uncomfortable situation always exists. Women living on the street, remember that's 1/3 of the homeless population, are very vulnerable to violence. There's so much uncounted violence on the street against women, sexual violence as well as physical violence. And for that reason, a significant percentage of women on the street do have pets for protection. This photo might sum it up. We're so judgmental. It's in our lives, we're making hundreds and thousands of judgments all day that we really can't control. It's how we deal with those judgments that's important. And if you think about that person we just looked at in that blue circle, his life, and that little yellow dot, probably smaller than that, is how much we know about someone's life. Well, I was recently in Las Vegas for a veterinary conference, and I learned about Street Dog Coalition was there in 2017. Recently, I found out the folks are still living in these tunnels underneath the interstate bridges. They're drainage tunnels, they're square concrete, and they generally stay dry because it hardly rains there. But when it does rain, everybody gets washed out, all their stuff, and them and their pets. And occasionally there's some drowning of people and or pets. But you can see how they've set up shop in these tunnels, and a number of them definitely do have pets, as you can see in this photo. These photos were all taken by journalists, photographers that had pretty good lighting, but generally it's almost pitch dark in these tunnels. So it's pretty tough scenario, but people do what they need to do. You can see a little bit of water there, probably after a rainstorm came through in one of those tunnels. Another thing that was going on, which is still happening, is violence on the street. I already mentioned it. Right when we were in Las Vegas getting ready to do a street clinic, we heard about this story where someone there was a serial killer who had already killed at least two men that were sleeping on the street under a sleeping bag. He had bludgeoned them to death. And sorry, this is so graphic, but the police then set up a sting operation with a video camera and a mannequin in a sleeping bag, and they caught the guy, videotaped him beating this mannequin, of course, arrested him. Despair and desperation in Las Vegas, you can see in this person's eyes. Sleeping on concrete, there's hardly any grass there. And the problem with that, what happened with that homeless person murder sting was that we were trying to do a street clinic, and there were a lot of authorities running around because we did it the next day after this happened. And there was police everywhere among the homeless population, kind of as part of this investigation. And so it definitely, people wearing uniforms will definitely keep people away from street clinics. Well, one of the big questions out there, I think it's been answered, is what's the root cause of homelessness? And listed here are three of the root causes of homelessness, which is major medical illness, along with severe mental illness and a drug use disorder, and a significant number of this population, combined with the high cost of housing, has created basically an unsolvable situation with few prospects for resolution. And as you saw in that previous slide, life expectancy can be as low as 42 to 52, living unsheltered in the streets. And here are some of the other topics that come into the conversation, because the time allotted, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but I'm going to try to get through as much of this as I can. Well, this is a quote from a book called My Dog Always Eats First by Dr. Leslie Irvin at University of Colorado, who we work with occasionally in some of our Colorado street clinics. And she interviewed over 100 homeless individuals and their pets for her book. And she came up with some really surprising conclusions, which I'm going to share with you. But one of the things is this the idea of pets can provide purpose to an otherwise purposeless life. So you can see in this quote how that definitely could happen. Dogs can be navigators for people. I've had folks tell me that when they get to a new place, and they got that say they do have a dog, they don't know where to go. They just kind of let their dog take them where their dog wants to go, and they usually end up in the best place that they could be. Already talked about pets as protection of women living on the street, such as this pet in Las Vegas on the left, whose owner had walked, I believe, 5 or 6 miles in quite extreme heat temperature situation with degrees over 100 degrees. And you notice she has a backpack on. That's a backpack from the veterinary convention that we were doing this clinic as part of. And we often do try to give away things like backpacks and hygiene kits as part of our street clinics whenever we can. Lady in the middle there is in Austin, Texas. She's quote unquote flying a sign with her dog, and the lady on the right is Fort Collins, Colorado, where either she or her husband has to sleep outside with the dog while the other person sleeps in the shelter, since dogs are not allowed. Well, this study needs to be updated, and actually I thought I really believe that My Dog's My Home might be the best organization to get it done. But we had a grant from PetSmart Charities that allowed a vet student to call over 780 homeless shelters in the United States, and she called them all 3 times, and she got responses from 238 finally. And here's what we found out is that, the responses were from 370 shelters, and she called 738, and those numbers transcribed. But in 2020, only 6% of US homeless shelters allowed pets, except for service dogs. And this map isn't particularly helpful because the dots don't really show that low percentage, but you can see that the yellow stars are maybe where you want to look. Those are locations where there are shelters. And again, I'd be very interested to see what that percentage is now, which could probably increase as a result of a lot of the work of from Dogs Are Home. I get to travel around a little bit as part of my work with Street Dog Coalition. And here's our first street clinic in Sacramento, where we had quite a few University of California Davis Vet School students helping us. And what was unique about this clinic is we pushed it right into the encampments in this scrubby brush near an abandoned almond factory in Sacramento. So this is the first clinic of its time. There was some other street clinics um, within town, but none that had pushed out right into the encampments, taking the medicine to the people. And in addition, we had Elica Healthcare had two street doctors going out and providing medical care, which is part of our One Health model that we're trying to advocate for. Now I'll take a look at another situation. And this is and some of you may recognize this if you're from Southern California, this Anaheim, California, where Orange County is located, the richest county, or at least one of the richest counties in the United States, right alongside abject poverty on this bike trail, where people aren't just spending the night in these little shelters, but this is where they live. So many of them have been designed, their shacks, their permanent housing for these folks, and many of them do have dogs, pets, because the weather is good, and also the pets are protecting these structures. And you can see from this overhead view what they look like. And when I was there in 2018, they announced that within 2 weeks of a week or two of my leaving, they were going to shut this whole encampment down. A very common story, since the city of Anaheim refused to provide any sanitation facilities such as trash removal, water, outhouses, or needle exchange. And you can see from this picture, it quickly turns into a public health hazard and is shut down. These folks were given vouchers for 30 days in a local motel and then just spilled back out on the streets. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they're set up once again along that bike trail. This is a very common expression. We'll see, like, where am I supposed to go now? So this cycle of shutdown and then resettlement is occurring in almost every city in the United States, as you probably all know. I would be an advocate of providing those sanitation facilities and making these encampments safer for people to stay, and accepting the fact there is not enough housing for everyone. People that have pets and don't have any money really do have limited options as when it comes to veterinary care, since they can't pay for it. So they can hope maybe friends and relatives can help them, but it's almost population is a very dysfunctional group because of mental health issues and drug abuse and addiction. There's a lot of fighting. There's stealing, and usually there's a really strong sense of isolation. Things like credit cards or care credit in hospital financing, pet insurance. These are strategies used by some folks to get veterinary care, but you definitely have to have some credit to do it, and you have to have some money for down payments. Some veterinarians are usually very compassionate people, and to whatever extent possible, they'll provide free or greatly reduced services. But with the advent of corporate buyouts, where large corporations are buying so many smaller clinics, discounting is definitely not allowed, except under circumstances that are permitted, which are usually pretty minimal. Relinquishing a pet is another unfortunate solution, although it may end up having a good outcome for the pet. And then finally, euthanasia happens fairly commonly when none of those other options are available. Going back to Dr. Irwin's book, My Dog Always Eats First, if you look at these two pictures and decide, well, which pet looks happier, I think probably most of us agree that pet on the left looks pretty darn happy. And that's because that pet is with their owner 24/7. They're living an active outdoor life. They get to spend time with lots of pets and people and their owners take really good care of them. They generally do eat first, as the title of this book shows. In that very first slide I showed you, I was going to mention, if you look at the dogs in these slides, you'll see most of them are pretty well cared for, and their body condition score is pretty good. There was actually a body condition score is a way to assess pets' general, one way to assess their general health, but it's really simply put is, are they overweight or underweight? And if it's severe, it's definitely concerning. And so an ideal body condition score is 5 out of 9. And here's an article from 2021 looking at body condition scores of people experiencing homelessness and housing vulnerability in Canada. And it turned out that the average body condition score was 5.4 out of 9, which is very similar for our owned pets as well. And even 38% of those pets were over conditioned, which means they were overweight or even obese. It's rare for me to see an emaciated dog on the street unless it's truly a street animal. Places like LA, one of our street clinics there it kind of turns into a designer clinic, as you can see from pictures of some of these dogs. And so the street clinics we do, the Street Dog Coalition puts on these street clinics in many settings in many different ways. And we try to make them fun events for people to come to, encourage them to come to. And as I'm going to share with you shortly, we are expanding into this One Health model where we're providing services such as medical, addiction counseling, dental cleanings for people and dental charting, and other potential services that they might not normally seek out on their own, but because we're able to build up a strong bridge of trust through the pets, our combination that pets often people are more receptive to getting those services. And here you see a New York City street clinic where a group of young folks is hanging out, and that's over near Coney Island. But you see this other fellow with his cat. We have some medical stuff going on in this van called Project Street Beat, doing some HIV testing. We got a groomer giving baths. We got Dr. Justin inside with his hands full with all these pets, and everyone's generally having a pretty good time, as you can see from this picture. It's down in Greenwich Village, New York, at Graffiti Church. Well, obviously, I'm just going to show you some street clinic settings and how they're all very different. But you see these Michigan State veterinary students in Detroit at a clinic called Mariners Inn right in downtown Detroit. It's actually it's also a shelter and a recovery program that we're set up at, and those usually are the best locations. So we have a pretty well staffed here for this clinic. It was the first one, so it wasn't all that busy. But if you look in the back over on the left, you'll see some other volunteers. Here's a closer look, and those are medical students from Wayne State University, part of Street Medicine Detroit, and they're checking out people that have pets, but they're also checking out people that have come to see what's going on that don't have pets, because that next tent to the left are folks that are providing free clothing and free haircuts as well. So people might come for that as well. Pets living on the street does create some public health challenges because they're on the street with their owners for generally 24 hours a day. So most pets are only out and about, maybe 12 hours a day at the most. And so some of these risks, which I'm listing here probably in order of importance, would be rabies, parasites, intestinal parasites, ectoparasites, which are fleas and ticks, and of course, bite wounds to humans and other pets. Other than rabies, I mean, rabies vaccination is job one, and luckily, rabies incidence in the United States is low. In the average year, there's perhaps 40 to 50 dogs that get rabies, more cats, close to 300 cats have rabies every year, but the incidence is low, but the consequences of having a dog bite someone are very high from a legal and financial point of view. And that's why we want to make sure all these pets living on the streets with their owners have vaccination certificates and tags, because if they don't, there's going to be a number of things will happen. One is a quarantine at home. And since there may not be a home, those dogs will end up going into a shelter for a quarantine, and the owners will be required to pay for that, in addition to other fines like having an unvaccinated dog running at large. So it's really important. And of course, bite wound risk is a significant risk out there, as well as parasites and other infectious diseases, as I've got listed here, knowing that folks living in the street are also immunocompromised, so they might be significantly affected by their own pet if they were having to get infection, say from parasites or salmonella bacteremia from eating some bad food. They might end up getting really sick, even if their dog or cat just licks them. They can get a pretty serious disease that we are all pretty immune to. And speaking of that immunocompromise, here's a very surprising disease that popped up in Denver 3 or 4 years ago called trench fever. It's a World War I disease caused by body lice, and it's caused by the feces of body lice that have this bacteria, Bartonella quintana, that causes signs similar to Lyme disease, fever, bone pain, headache, vomiting, malaise, and it took doctors quite a long time to diagnose this. Now, this organism does exist in dogs, but it does not appear to be spread by dogs. So we would say it's not strictly zoonotic, but it is caused by body lice and living conditions where people don't have access to laundry facilities or even changes of clothing. Some of the other diseases in humans that we've seen that are zoonotically related are delusional parasitosis, where people imagine they have little bugs crawling all over them.
You've had one of those.
And we've had 2 or 3 cases of those. Oh, sorry, I wanted to mention there's what we call it is these patients have also projected this onto their pets, meaning they believe their pets also are infested with parasites, and that's called projected delusional parasitosis. And when we see these, what so far has been in cats, we've gone ahead and treated them Bravecto, even though they tested negative for any kind of parasites or mites, just to allay the owner with what is basically a placebo, but it's certainly not going to do any harm. Matter of fact, all pets really living on the street need to have parasite protection, just because the population of ticks is going up with climate change, and this could also apply to mites and fleas as well. Even those that are living inside, even if someone's living in a shelter. As I start to finish up here, I did want to talk about homeless veterans, which in this past year, the count has gone down a little bit from back when Obama was president. It was 38,000. Now it's 35,574. And dogs and cats have actually become a significant barrier to suicide in these individuals, just because they've told me that. If you're looking at all veterans as a whole, I'm not talking about homeless veterans or pet owning veterans, but they make up 7% of the US population, but 16% of US suicides. Here's some photos from a veteran stand down, which is a multi-service project that goes on all day, and multiple services like legal aid, clothing, sleeping bags, haircuts, health screenings, medical care, and housing, and so on, all occur at the same time. So here's a couple of guys that brought their dogs to this clinic in North Denver. Here's another a veterans event in Fort Collins, where I'm from, and this fellow this veteran with his pet told me this, so I'm quoting him. And then he didn't answer the question. He just raised up his hand and made kind of slashing marks across one wrist with his other hand. So we all knew what that meant. This study that I'm quoting hasn't actually been done, but I wish it would be done, because it could be done right now. How many veterans that have pets take their own lives compared to how many veterans without pets? It'd be interesting to see. Looking a little bit on the um, future programs and future hope to provide some additional access to care for people living on the street is this one program called Line Care, which is being run out of the University of Tennessee. And it's a network of hospitals that will provide potentially discounted care to folks that are living below the poverty line. One challenge of the line care is that people do have to come up with 20% down payment for, excuse me, looks like as I run out of time here, 20% down payment to cover the cost of care. So this applies more to the working poor and families in need. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to thank you for your attention. And I'm looking forward to attending this conference as well. Thank you.
That went well, except for the cat.